Hello and welcome to Deep in Pact, a proud member of the Doof Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most tattooed work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to discuss Subordination 12, is it? Oh, is that right? It doesn't feel right. Anyway, let's get into it. The chapter starts with Blake and us, the audience, being very confused about what's going on.
Yeah. I'm so mad about this because I think you gave me every hint possible that this wasn't going to be a thing, and I just completely missed all of them. I was like, I actually went to read this like at work while I was waiting for some code to compile, and so I was sort of sitting there, and I'm sort of absent-mindedly keeping one eye on another window, and like when this, I went to the table of contents, scrolled down to 611, clicked on it. And it just takes you back to the table of contents. And I went through that like 4 times before I was like, wait, hold on. What's going on here? And then, it took me a few minutes to figure it out. It was, it's such a good prank.
Yeah, it was good fun. But I got to say, scheduling a podcast where the episodes release on the 5-year anniversary of the original chapters and not spoiling this for you was a bit of a nightmare. But it seemed to work.
Yeah, well, I mean, lucky for us, our website was failing, so it just meant, like, the time I'd allocated to do 6.11 work I could spend fixing our website, which, knock on wood, has been up for 24 hours, and if you're listening to this, hopefully the days of our website not working are behind us, for now.
Yep, and if you're getting website errors and you can't hear this episode, well then, it doesn't matter, so we can gloat anyway. But yeah, putting all that stuff aside, this is such a great, it's such a great little trick that is like a metatextual trick that is played here, right? Because obviously, for example, back when Blake was in the police station, obviously he was kind of confused by what was going on to start with, but we didn't, feel that to the same extent that Blake did. But this trick is such a great, simple way to put us in the same mindset of like, wait, what's happening? What's going on? And it just starts you off from a confused angle. It's a great way to lead into this exact same feeling that Blake has. It's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. It's fantastic. And because it's not just a dumb prank on us. Like, obviously it is that too. Like, Wildbow is having fun with us, which is hilarious. But it's not just that. Like, as you said, this is what it would be like to fight the Behaims. This is the sort of shit they're going to pull on you, and like it makes sense that it would happen to us as well. Like we are sort of viewing this whole story from Blake's perspective, and if Blake is missing perspective, then we should too. And I think that helps us sort of stay with Blake. We've already seen like the story has been given to us. With the erasure demon, we were missing. The edits there, and so I think it's consistent, but it just it makes sense from a narrative perspective. Like it works on every level, which is great.
Yeah, more than that, even though, like it's feasible that this chapter could have just been called 6.11, and we start with some skip time, and we kind of have to. We're in Blake's shoes to an extent. We're catching up, but the fact that there's this like metatextual trick played on us as well, just kind of it really adds to it. I really love it.
Yeah, I agree. It's that extra decoration that takes it from like good to great.
Yeah. Blake's basically really confused. It seems like everybody's out of place. Rose, Maggie, and Phil are all kind of nowhere to be seen. Blake is basically all alone except for Evan, who comes in for a bit and then gets sent off quickly on a quick scouting mish.
It's funny because like as I was sort of reading this, trying to figure out what was happening, and as I'm getting my head around it, sort of as Blake is, I was never really that worried for him because I was like, if you had to pick a practitioner that this would disrupt the least, like, Blake's got to be right up there.
For sure.
Because, I mean, he's just kind of working out of his ass all the time. Like, this is kind of just status quo for him. So it kind of sucks for the Behaims that they've done this to the person that probably, like, it kind of relies on Blake having a plan or something, which he doesn't anyway. So, it kind of sucks for them.
It kind of reminds me of that scene from the old Yu-Gi-Oh anime where Yugi's up against a Pegasus who can read his mind. And so Yugi's counter to that is to just play cards off the top of his deck without knowing what they are, which is like so perfectly stupid. And it's the same way that Blake's just the natural counter to this because he doesn't plan things out in advance.
Yeah, Blake's been playing the whole tournament by just playing whatever card was on the top of his deck without knowing what it was.
Yeah. It's great because it is kind of his element, and so he's not as caught off guard by it. But he is caught off guard, and the young Behaims that he's up against are so smarmy about it and so like so shitty. They're so Behaim. It's great.
Yeah, like I find myself as I'm going through this chapter flickering between that they're just kids mentality and also like, oh man, fuck these guys. I really like Craig though because like he's got those sticky notes which I assume are maybe his implement, and that's just such a hilarious implement to me that I can't help but love him. I didn't
have that thought until you wrote it down because it's just so ridiculous. It can't be his implement. That would just be too weird, and it would mean his implement would expire. I think it's just a piece of flair. I don't know, unless it's like a never-ending stack of post-it notes.
Yeah, that's a good. I hadn't thought about the pad running out. Maybe it's charmed to be like unlimited or something. But I like the idea of like something. Well, like to me, it symbolizes this like temporary like move on thing. Like it's like I'll do this and then I'll do that, which it's like very adaptable. Which like it kind of goes against the whole chronomancy thing a bit now that I think about it. But anyway, yeah, I love this moment. We're talking about all the young Behaims where Owen is when Blake's trying stuff in a bit, and Owen just sort of says to him like, "You're just like guessing, aren't you?" And it was, like I just immediately read it with this really smug, condescending tone, like you're an idiot.
Yeah. No, I mean it's right. He is just guessing. That's Blake's whole MO.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's right. But the way he says it, I also just really wanted while we're on the topic of the Behaims and how smug they are. We had a comment in the 6.10 Reddit thread from Sohybum7, who points out that like the way the Behaims' power works really fits. Like it's this whole sort of trust fund magic. Like they have this big well of power. And it's passed from generation to generation, like, stays within the family. And it's like such a great metaphor for like them being like trust fund kids. Like it's literally trust fund magic that is sort of hoarded by the family. And I thought that fits so well with the Behaim sort of smug attitude and everything. I really like that idea.
Yeah, it's a pretty perfect not an analogy, but like a connection, right?
Yeah, connection's a good word for it. It just it fits into everything else that we know about the Behaims and chronomancy and all that so well that like I just have to believe that it was somewhat intentional.
Yeah, and I think it suits the kind of undercurrent of like privilege and a bit of classism that defines the Behaim/Thorburn relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's perfect. So the Behaims, specifically Ainsley Behaim, is kind of doing this little bit of a ritual on Blake that is basically paralyzing him and binding him over time. And so as he's trying to escape, his legs are just slowly shutting down and getting less and less responsive.
Yeah, and it's sort of with each hour, which is like the term she's using as she's sticking needles in this candle. It's like getting stronger and stronger, and there's that like old Behaim magic feeling where it's like this slow and inevitable march of, like, they don't just suddenly bind him. It's like time's woven in, and so there's this sense of like it's getting worse, which I really like.
Yeah, repetition as well is a big theme for the Behaims.
Yeah, and I like the use of the Fibonacci numbers. Like she goes up in Fibonacci. As she's counting the hours, which was just a nice little nerdy detail. I was sort of like, oh, neat.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a cool little detail. And I quite like this. So we've had a few of these little kind of ticking clocks in Pact so far that have just been Blake's body being slowly fucked up over time. So, we had the heart attack ghost a few chapters ago. We had Mr. Legs in the hyena fight. I really like the body horror of Blake's body just kind of slowly shutting down and becoming weak and shit over time, and that being the impending doom.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is something that's starting to wear on me a little bit. Like how much Blake is constantly getting absolutely smashed. Like, you know, it feels like he reaches breaking point every other chapter. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not tracking it, but it feels like we always get so many details on how, like, you know, Evan getting hit sort of makes him feel like he's being hit by a car, and you know he got so scratched up fighting Pose and stuff. And then I don't feel like we ever really get as much on, like, it just sounds like he's a bit better but still pretty fucked. And I don't know, I guess this is one of my few complaints about Pact so far, is it just does feel like Blake has like gone beyond the breaking point so many times that I don't really understand like where he's at anymore. Like, it's
Sure.
just, it feels like he's so beyond broken that I don't really understand how he's still operating. And I don't know, like, I'm just not as impacted as much when it's like Blake had the wind knocked out of him or something, like when Evan gets hit, because I'm like, well, he's, you know, he's had that, like, he's about 20 cars in by this point.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that's fair, but to me, I always kind of read it as, you know, for example, this binding or the heart attack are these kind of like magical attacks that aren't really, I don't know, like, some things are fucking up his body, but some things are just kind of making him feel like his body's fucked up. And once he's out of the imminent threat of that thing, whatever it is, he can bounce back to his usual damaged, broken self, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's just something I've just been like, you know, when's he gonna? I don't have a clear sense of how much better he's getting, and I guess Blake doesn't either. Like, Blake's made a point of noting that he's like, I think I'm better, but I'm still kind of fucked. I don't know. So
true.
like that is sort of, I guess, the headspace we're maybe meant to be in. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So Ainsley is kind of slowly binding Blake, and as this is happening, he basically just keeps trying shit. Like, he just throws everything out there in a desperate attempt to try things.
Yeah, like, I loved it. It's just this sequence of Blake being like, I'll try this.
How about this? Yeah, I want to read one out, which I really like. Where Blake says, I reject your binding. I spat the words. Because I have sources telling me I won't fucking make it to old age. Your third point doesn't stick. Doesn't matter, Sunglasses said. Ainsley nodded, grave. Fuck, I muttered. Which, this is just a great example of Blake trying a random thing, trying to like bullshit his way through this, and it just, usually it does kind of work for him. This time it just does not work.
Yeah, but no, like he's right. He's just trying to call out their bullshit by spouting his own bullshit, and yeah, it doesn't work. I think my favorite is when as Ainsley's like counting up the hours, he just starts like counting to distract her. Like, it's so petty. It's hilarious. It's such a great.
Awesome.
It is a good idea, but just the way it's
works
done
as well, which is hilarious. Like, it's the most childish and stupid technique, but it totally works where nothing else did.
He's been hanging out with Evan too much.
Yeah. So, you know, Blake's throwing out all his childish tricks to stop himself from being bound, and he almost works. But he's kind of saved by the arrival of these goblins that I guess have been let loose by Maggie in the missing chapter.
Yeah, or they say that she tripped a snare, and that's not long before they show up. So she may have just like let them loose after tripping on the snare. But I mean, we don't know it's her that tripped the snare at first, and like it becomes apparent later. But like, I can't like this because I actually instantly sort of assumed it's Maggie, because like a normal practitioner like Fell or someone would just, they'd be quite cautious and you'd expect them to pick it, whereas, you know, we already know Maggie is presumably like a bit careless and you know, like, like I can just totally see her being someone who's just sort of walking down the corridor, doesn't notice the trap, falls in it, and then she's just like crumbs and has to deal with it from there, you know?
Yeah. It's definitely in character for her to just kind of bluster her way into a snare by mistake.
Yeah, and you know, that's what I love about these stories. Like Pact is, you know, I assumed it was Maggie trapped in the snare just because of the characterization, and it turns out it was. Like it's also consistent. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, so these goblins come in, and the Behaim kids are all kind of freaking out. at this, right? Which is weird. I mean, they're young, but it does give me this vibe of us having become kind of desensitized to how fucked up some of this stuff is. Like, we get a description of one of these goblins, and his, like, genitals are all mangled up with wire among them and stuff, and I'm just reading over it like, yep, sure, whatever, goblins, makes sense.
He's a gremlin.
Whereas
Checks out.
Yeah, but the Behaim teens are, I think, reacting appropriately to this.
Yeah, I think I do like how the story keeps sort of reminding us that Blake's experience of this world is not the normal one, because I think it would be easy to forget. And seeing stuff like the Behaims just freak out at like gremlins, which are so not like what Blake would be freaking out that much over anymore. I especially love this bit where Tandy, one of the Behaims who's out there, is like, as soon as they appear, she's like, no, please no more horror movie stuff, please, no. And it's just like, because for us the gremlins, it's just like, that's nothing, Tandy. Like,
yeah, we've seen much worse.
Like between Mary and stuff, this is like a huge traumatic, scary thing for them. Whereas for Blake, this is like him with one hand tied behind his back because he won't use his real horror movie stuff.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important here is we don't know how much messed up stuff we missed in 6.11, right? These Behaim kids could have genuinely been terrified by some of the quite freaky shit that we know the Thorburn cabal has access to.
Well, yeah, like we know the Tallow Man's out by the end of the chapter, so like he may have been up to creepy shit. I mean, yeah, it's all that's really mentioned is just Mary in the bathroom. Like I think it's Ainsley who's like, just based on what I saw in the bathroom, that's enough to make me think you're terrible and blah blah blah. I kind of get that. I think that's very fair. But you're right, like, there may be even more shit that happened to some of them that we have no idea about.
Yeah. So, the goblins, I mean, I guess gremlins, are causing, mayhem and fucking with shit until one of them, Screwloose, kind of starts towards Blake.
Yeah, which is like, because he doesn't just randomly pick Blake. It's like Blake is trying to protect the Behaims and is like, hey... go back to Maggie and whatever, and turns out Screwloose doesn't have to listen to him at all.
Yep.
So he just turns on Blake, which is, I mean, that's so Blake that he's like trying to help his enemy, and it turns out that he just makes another enemy. Like, story of his life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun moment because Blake's kind of like, he feels the tide turning a bit, and then he kind of fucks it up by being too nice. Yeah, which is, it is very Blake, but it doesn't endear him to these to the Behaims. There's a bit later where Screwloose is advancing towards Blake and his legs are frozen in place, so he can't get away. And I'm just going to read the quote actually. I glanced at Ainsley. She still held the candle. She looked down at the candle, then back at me. She shook her head. And this is such great little like visual storytelling to say, hey Blake, don't help these people too much because they're not on your side.
And I mean, there's a bit later, I guess I'm jumping ahead a little, but he offers to like help save Owen, I think it is, like as he's being crushed by a car, and he almost gets through to Ainsley, like she's sort of thinking, oh, you did, because he does bind himself in the end to save her, and she's sort of starting to have her doubts, and then he's like, if you don't help me, then like I'm better than you, and that's really this bit where it sort of clicks, and she's like, no, you can't possibly be better than me. You're a diabolist and you're evil and all that Behaim Kool-Aid, as Blake refers to it as, kicks in, and it's just like, Blake keeps getting so close to getting there, and then he says something that is just the wrong thing, and it ends up all completely backfiring.
Yeah, I mean, I think Blake fighting against the tide of like Behaim Kool-Aid, I guess, has been such an interesting theme in this, because he's been so, I mean, I guess it's not just the Behaims. He's been constantly trying to prove himself to random people, right? And it's such a fun thread to watch him. He always goes out of his way to try and be nice, and it always doesn't work. And then these people just keep thinking, oh, this is just some shitty diabolist Thorburn, whatever. Don't have to worry about him. One of these days, Blake, he'll make a friend.
Yeah. Oh, but it's just because he's so close to getting through to her, and then like he just mentions like himself potentially being good almost explicitly, and that's enough to sort of trip the wire.
That's enough. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. One of these days he'll get through, I'm sure. So Screwloose keeps advancing on Blake and is kind of shooting him with this makeshift shotgun thing, but Blake kind of manages to get his hands on some of the Behaims' protective chains, and he uses it to start strangling Screwloose.
Yeah, but Screwloose fucking loves it.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, crude humor, at least for me, is pretty hit or miss. Like, all this gremlin humor going on here is very like, just like grossness kind of humor, and I find I usually find that very hit or miss, but it's very hit for me particularly in this chapter, but throughout most of this story, like the gremlins are gross in really unique and like fitting ways that just makes the humor really work for me.
I think it does come down to consistency, honestly. I mean, like, obviously this book is pretty serious a lot of the time, but whenever we get these gremlins, we know that gremlins, we know what they're going to be like. We know that they're going to be like this. And you kind of, I think crude humor often fails when it just kind of is thrown in as a type of humor among other things. But with these gremlins and goblins, you always know, oh, this is what this is going to be. And it's going to be fucking bizarre and weird, and you always kind of enjoy it as a result.
Well, and it fits into the other stuff they're doing, right? Like they're being like crazy menaces who are like fucked up. So
yeah,
like they're fucked up sort of physically and in what they do.
Why would they do this?
It's not just this unnecessary tacked on trait. It's part of their whole being, and that's part of why it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I like how they're so weird, they're so bizarre, they're so fun, but they actually are also genuinely quite a credible threat, which is an interesting balance that is maintained, because goblins consistently are probably among the most like useful others that we've seen more than one of, right? Like they're always doing useful things to mess with people. They're always kind of helping if you put them in the space where they'll just fuck shit up. It's very interesting. That balance is really struck quite well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. They do seem to be kind of consistently underestimated, and it's hard to tell if it's because these are novice practitioners, because Laird seems to scare them off quite handily. But, like, I don't know. I think symbolically, if they are something that's consistently underestimated, that will probably carry through to Maggie, which is interesting, because, I mean, I think it's fair to say that most of the people in Jacob's Bell underestimate her capabilities, particularly Laird.
Yeah, it's true.
So that might be sort of something we're heading up to. And I mean, it's interesting. Blake is constantly overestimated by a lot of people, I think. So, maybe demons aren't as much of a threat as everyone thinks. It's fine.
Goblins are the bigger threat, apparently. So eventually Blake manages to kind of get through to Screwloose and makes a deal with him. Basically, he can go and fuck with Laird as long as he leaves these poor Behaim teens alone, and then he can just kind of fuck off and do whatever. And Screwloose obliges and kind of runs off. And as Screwloose leaves, Evan returns, kind of reporting where the rest of the Cabal are, that they're dealing with their own shit. And Blake tells him, hey, we need backup. Go get the hyena.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, the result of this scouting operation was everyone's pretty fucked, which is like,
yeah,
could this have been a bad plan?
No. Who would say such a thing, Elliot? Yeah, no, it was a bad plan. But, bad plans are where Blake excels, and this is no different, I suppose. I want to touch on, Blake sends Evan to get the hyena, which is important, right? And he sticks to his promise that he almost made. He didn't quite make the promise, but he almost made the promise to Evan about making sure he got Evan's permission, right? He's pushy about this a little bit, but, no more than is necessary in this situation, I think. And he gives Evan complete control over the hyena here, where Evan's fully in charge. I think he does pretty good. This is a pretty good example of Blake keeping his promises to everybody except Rose.
Yeah. I mean, I like how this is sort of introduced, because Blake's like, we need more firepower, and Evan's just sort of like, should I get the imp? It's like,
yeah,
no,
let's try
Evan. But I agree. I like this solution of giving the hyena to Evan as a way to sort of balance the emotions within the group that surround this thing.
Yeah.
I also particularly love it because Evan's fucking hilarious with it. Like, when he shows up with the hyena in a bit, he's like saying stuff to it like, obey me, mutt, and go up. Like, he's taking every opportunity he can to shit on the hyena, which I love.
Yeah, as you would in that situation.
Oh, for sure.
It is a good solution. It just is. It's a very clean way of Blake kind of keeping Evan on side, even though he has to use the hyena here.
Yeah. I think it's a really fair and good strategy. I also have this bit after sort of Evan agrees. Blake goes, "Will you forgive me, Evan?" And Evan sort of says, "Yes, because your heart's in the right place, even if this is stupid." And I was just like, "Oh, I remember back when Rose used to say stuff like that, 3 arcs ago." I wonder how long Evan's gonna last.
How many times will it take, I wonder, before he before he sours to that idea? So Evan goes off to get the hyena, and as he leaves, Laird arrives and kind of clearly is able to take control of this situation pretty definitively. He kind of shuts down the gremlins pretty quickly and reports, "Oh, okay, we've won. The Behaims have taken control, and Conquest is on his way." And he kind of is holding Blake at gunpoint. And so it looks pretty grim for a bit here.
Well, yeah, but of course, he's a Behaim, so he gets a little bit too smug about it. I have to call out this one line where Blake's sort of arguing with Laird about... Laird sort of admits that he's probably racking up some bad karma doing all this. And Blake says, "Oh, so you're borrowing against the future for the sake of the present?" And Laird responds, "I would say it's just the opposite." Which took me a couple of seconds to process when I first read it, and I was like, "Oh, that's clever." And it's not just like a witty line, but it so well encapsulates the different mindsets that both of these characters are operating in. I really like it.
Yeah, I think we haven't talked about this that much, but Laird has always been pretty quick with the words, right? Like he's pretty good at the whole wordsmith part of being a practitioner. He always seems to have the right comebacks to Blake, assuming that the right comebacks, are his perspective.
Well, yeah. No, I've always found his perspective, even though I disagree with it, because obviously I'm Team Blake, and I don't know how much that's biased by the perspective of the story. But Laird has always sort of come across as somewhat fair and consistent from his point of view. I disagree with his point of view, but from where he's coming, you're always like, well, that's reasonable.
And that's what makes the Behaims so great, right? Because Laird is he's such a charismatic and interesting villain, in air quotes, I suppose. But the rest of the Behaims just follow his thoughts without any of the kind of cleverness behind it, and it leads to them being so smug and single-minded and having none of Laird's charisma. It's great.
Yeah, you can definitely see why he rose to become head of the family.
Yeah. He's very fun. And he's so smug about this, and he's so he almost you get the sense that he thinks Blake should kind of be thanking him for how he's treating him. Laird's plan here is to trap Blake in the body of a 90-year-old to kind of make him, impotent in this situation. And you really feel like he thinks Blake should be like, "Oh, thank you for not killing me, sir."
Which, I mean, again, to be fair, is kind of a reasonable spot to be in. A lot of people do want to kill Blake. I think from his perspective, being one of the few people who doesn't want to kill Blake, he is in the top 10% of people Blake knows at the moment. I don't know. I can see why he thinks that. Yeah.
I don't know. It just, I also can see why he thinks that, but it's so smug. Yeah. So at this point, Evan and the hyena come back, but Laird is prepared for this. The parking lot has a fence that kind of is able to ward off the hyena, it seems. At least until Screwloose pulls a very strange trick to give Laird an electric shock.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I thought the hyena was more stopped by natural things. That was something we kind of established with all the holly hedges back in Arc 4, I think it was. But I guess this is a particularly big metal fence, or that wasn't a complete transition, so it still works on the hyena. But I was a bit I was actually expecting the hyena to just leap the fence because of how different it was from other goblins.
That fence has actually been grown. It wasn't built. It was grown from a little baby fence seed. No, yeah, you're right. It is interesting. I mean, I guess the hyena is a goblin still, right? So
yeah.
So yeah, it took me a few reads to actually figure out what Screwloose does here. He is peeing on Laird to kind of, I don't know, to he initially starts peeing on people to put out some candles that are being used in these little rituals. And then he pees on Laird's jacket and then grabs this post-it note that was used to electrify the fence and electrifies himself, which then travels along his pee stream and knocks out Laird. Like, it's the most bizarre thing for a goblin to do, but it's so, like, perfect.
Yeah, that was sort of my understanding of what went down, is Screwloose was sort of peeing on them and then, like, electrocuted himself. And, of course, his, like, piss stream was enhanced by all the weird shit he's done to his genitals. And so then he electrocuted himself and it carried through the piss, which is, yeah, as you said, so it's just bizarre and hilarious and creative. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, so Screwloose saves the day with his electric urine, and Laird is knocked unconscious, and from this, Blake is able to kind of take control of this situation. They reunite the Cabal, or they kind of reunite the Cabal, I suppose, and the hyena carries off Laird's unconscious body in its mouth as their hostage, and they pull a surprising upset in this air quotes plan.
Well, Rose seems to think it's a bit early to call that, but Blake's pretty confident because he has some secret plan to do with knowing how the Behaims' power works, and I guess some way to manipulate or stop that. Which I have no idea what he's thinking. I'm really interested to go ahead and find out. Like, at this point, my best guess is they have a big candle out back or something, because there were candles in this one.
Yeah, I'm sure that's it. A giant candle. But, I'm excited to see. I think the thing that I've missed the most since we came to Toronto was the dynamic between Blake and Laird, and I'm excited to really get more into that.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see. I think the next chapter I saw is an interlude, so no idea whose perspective that's going to be from, but I can't wait to jump back into 7.1, I guess, to see what happens there.
Yeah. Well, I guess we will in a bit, but not today, because that's the end of our discussion of 6.12. Before we leave, though, we wanted to touch on some of the answers that people left in response to our discussion question, which was talking about historical events that were so weird that they must be examples of, rationalized, retconned practitioning being understood by the uninitiated masses. We got a lot of good responses to this.
Yeah, we're running a bit overboard, so we might have to skip some of the ones we pulled out, which sucks. But I wanted to pull out one by Sarah Penguin, who brought up Alexander the Great. He was clearly really overpowered back in the day. Like, he won like all these battles and built a huge empire. And then at like age 32, he just mysteriously died, which is a detail I didn't really know. And so Sarah and some of the other users responding to their comment just sort of were discussing like how suspicious his death was, and it seems like somebody may have like poisoned the local lord, so to speak.
Yeah, I think my headcanon for this is that he made some deal with some kind of like Barbatorum-esque entity that gave him great feats of strategy and made him kind of invulnerable, but like halved his life expectancy or whatever. So he did a lot of great shit and then just kind of suddenly died.
Yeah. And then Awesome Toast brings up the Great Emu War, which I didn't appreciate because that's a very serious time in Australia's history, and we don't joke about
a serious topic for us over here.
No, just kidding. Like, I like this idea that it's a nature spirit or some indigenous practitioner or something that was fighting back against the European invasion.
Should we explain what the Great Emu War is, Elliot, for our non-Australian listeners?
I guess I just assume it's such an internet meme that most people might have heard about it. If not, like, Google the Great Emu War. It's not Australia's proudest moment.
It's hilarious. So I'll give the short summary of it, which is basically that in Australia's history, there was a time where we tried to cull the population of emus that are, they're like ostrich-esque species over here. And a bunch of people went out to try and cull these emus and failed and got defeated and had to give up.
It wasn't just a bunch of people; it was our actual military.
So yeah, it was our military. You're right.
With machine guns and stuff, and they went out there and lost to the emus.
And they lost to the emus, which is hilarious. No, you're right. I think it's a great idea that this is some kind of like nature spirit or kind of indigenous practitioner that is kind of fighting back against the encroaching upon of their land and uses the animals as their weapon. It's awesome. It's a great idea.
Johansson, have we decided how to pronounce that yet? Anyway,
Juan Sasson.
Juan Sasson brings up the Tunguska event, which was that big like meteor thing, and I was like, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, that's like Orneus, isn't it? And that's exactly where they were going. Like, somebody said Orneus 7 times, and you see a giant meteor land. Like that's sort of how we retcon the appearance of this celestial demon.
Yeah, totally. I think the great thing about it is it's all these weird missing holes that don't quite make sense, that I'm sure we hopefully one day will find an explanation for. They're such the perfect playground for theorizing about a huge, massive demon that came down and fucked shit up. I wanted to pull out one that I really liked about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, which kicked off World War One. And the story of this is the people that set out to assassinate him basically fucked everything up so many times and would have failed in their mission to assassinate him if not for the place that one of them went to get like lunch or something. His car happened to break down outside it, and so they managed to save it with this completely left field fluke. So Brawl97 wrote this paragraph that I want to read out where he says, I just imagine a group of Austrian Secret Service practitioners frantically using connection-breaking magic and other shit to foul up the plan. An epic magic duel ensuing for the fate of the world, hanging for the balance. Only for the one unawakened guy who gave up for an early lunch to ruin everything. Which is just such a perfect narrative that I want to see that play out.
Yeah, totally. I also like the idea of maybe like that was just a practitioner who had good karma or something. It's just like, oh, cheers, universe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the last ones I want to pull out is from Kyrgyzstan, who brings up an event I'd never heard of, but is insane, which is the Great Molasses Flood of Boston, which is basically this giant container of like 10,000 cubic meters of molasses broke and killed over 20 people, which is just insane. And so anyway, Kyrgyzstan wrote this great little like short story type, or like a few paragraphs kind of explaining the lore behind how these practitioner groups were having a war and resulting in the molasses explosion. It was a great little read. It's definitely worth checking out, especially because there's a link there to more details on the Great Molasses Flood, which is just an insane story.
Yeah, I really liked this discussion question. We got so many great answers, and they're all the exact kind of things I was hoping they would be, just like weird historical quirks. Great stuff. And if anyone has any other ones, definitely leave them in the discussion thread for this episode, because I love reading about these.
I'd love to keep hearing more. Like, there are a bunch that we've just sort of had to skip over due to time, but like, so many great wacky historical things that could just be explained with practicing.
Yeah. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. That brings us to the end of 6.12, but don't worry, we'll be back in 3 or 4 days to talk about 6.x on Monday the 27th.
But if you can't wait till then, as we said, you can hop in the discussion thread and tell us all about what other wacky practicing stuff happened in our world.
Or tell us about the declarative, authoritative, and socio-cultural implications of having post-it notes as your implement. I would love to read that. If you want to support the show or check out some of the other great shows that are on the Doof Media Network, you can head to doofmedia.com. Just recently released was the final episode about We've Got War. Man, let me just start that sentence again. Recently released was We've Got Ward, the final part, talking about Arc 6, and talking about the start of Arc 7, which is by far the horniest chapter of Ward that has ever been.
Wait, do you mean 13 and 14? They're not that
13 and 14. I got them mixed up with our episodes, I think. Yeah. But yeah, so the start of chapter 14 is so fun, and I've been really enjoying hearing Scott and Matt talking about it.
I mean, I'm actually like 5 or 6 chapters behind in Ward at the moment, and
Shame on you.
that's like 3 weeks behind in We've Got Ward, which that's like
Yeah.
So I don't really have anything to comment, I guess, but I'm keen to catch up.
Yeah, you should catch up because it's going very good, and I'm very much enjoying that we've got more discussions about it at this point. If you want to support the Duff Media Network, the best way to do that is by going to patreon.com/duffmedia. We're a Patreon-backed network, which means that we kind of exist in the form that we exist in because of our listeners. Specifically, the listeners that decide to give us some money every month. So there's a number of great perks that you can get if you back us on Patreon. So go check it out.
Yeah, and of course the Doof Media Network isn't the only thing that relies on Patreons to keep it afloat. Wildbow also relies on his Patreons to keep him writing. So head over to patreon.com/Wildbow to help ensure that we keep getting more and more awesome horny stories. Apparently.
Yes, definitely. The hornier the better. So definitely head on over to patreon.com/Wildbow and throw him some money every month. Well, that's us for this episode, I believe.
So we'll see everyone on Monday the 27th.
See you then.